5, 6, 7, 8.
Hey everyone, welcome to the EX podcast episode number 3. My name is Stefan Vincent. I've started this podcast because I believe that companies have to think of themselves as employment brands if they hope to attract and retain talent. Let me ask you a simple question. Are you excited to get up every day and go to work? Well, consider this. Only 30% of the US workers feel engaged at work. That means for the other 70%, well, work kind of sucks. Yes, we all get it. Engaged employees are good for business. But why companies are not acting on it? After all, employees are the first ambassadors of a brand. Engaged employees foster innovation, deliver higher customer service, and bring creativity to an organization. In short, they are more productive. This podcast brings a different lens to the employee experience, a brand and customer experience angle rather than a traditional HR angle. In our episodes, we cover multiple topics that touch and impact the employee experience, like the key components of a positive employee experience, or office space design and its impact on the company's culture, the employee journey map, or how design thinking, collaboration, and innovation are intertwined. We also talk about employer branding and employee engagement tools and measurements, or the place of technology in the employee experience. Today's guest is Max Yoder from Lessonly. Max co-founded Lessonly and started its non-profit arm, the First Fund. He grew the 4.5-year-old company to 60-plus employees in a short period of time, the company that is celebrated nationwide for its culture. Today we'll talk about how building a strong company culture is all about experimentation and iteration, how the CEO's vulnerability is a key success factor to build a culture of trust, why Max believes that employees flourish when they are shown that their productivity and developments are valued, and why learning is critical to employee engagement and growth. And finally, how to scale up the culture when the company grows so rapidly. This episode is brought to you by Mold, M-O-L-D. Mold is a full-service brand agency that works with artists, writers, and creatives to help its clients increase sales, book more gigs, and boost audience engagements. Its creative team of graphic designers, videographers, writers, and brand managers work together to make sure that every time a client's name is seen or heard, it shines. I hope you enjoy this conversation. If you get a chance, please make sure to review the podcast on iTunes. You can open the iTunes app and type in Stefan Vincent or EX Podcast and you will find us there. And last thing, if you want to send me feedback, suggestions for future topics or guests, you can reach me at svincent@exsummit.com or on Twitter at @ex_summit. All right, let's get to it. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the EX podcast. Very excited for today's guest, Max Yoder. Max is the CEO of Lessonly, and Lessonly has won multiple awards for best culture and best places to work. What is very interesting, on the websites, they said that Lessonly was created in response to a learning software industry that has historically favored companies' needs over the needs of people.
Correct.
And that you didn't agree with that approach then, and you still don't. You believe that employees flourish when they are shown that their productivity and development are valued.
Right.
So in other words, in whatever you do externally and internally, employees are the center of what you do.
Oh man, yeah, people, nothing more important than the people on the team. Thank you for having me.
Okay, thanks for being with us today. I appreciate it. So tell me about your role first and what Lessonly does exactly.
Sure, Lessonly is a modern learning management system. People call them LMSs. Generally, learning management systems are used for compliance. We take a different approach. The traditional approach is compliance learning, leadership and development. The lessonly approach to modern LMSs is productivity learning. So practical, tactical, how to do X and Y learning that can be delivered to you when you need it. It's available to you with a search, or it's dynamically brought to you with a Chrome extension. So if you are on a sales team or a support team and the task at hand, you forget maybe the best way to do it, or you want to refresh yourself on the most recent version of the team's playbook that's always changing, as every playbook does in a growing company, you can do a quick search to find what you need and get back to work knowing that you're doing the right thing. But when you start at a company, most importantly, we've teed up this path to productivity for you if you're a client that uses Lessonly. The path to productivity is going to start you on why does the company exist, why does your role matter, what's expected of you in your role, and what do you need to do to achieve those expectations. And a lot of companies expect their employees to do great things, but they don't take the time to document the work knowledge that those employees need to achieve those goals. So oftentimes the employees want to do well, so they start building their own version of what a really good experience looks like.
Right.
And they just started, or they just entered that role, and you've learned so much over time as a company that you're not actively sharing that information with people, so they're highly likely to make mistakes that you've already made in the past, and that just costs you time, money, and effort. It's not fun for anybody. Let's not run in circles. Let's start documenting what works and what doesn't in just really practical ways.
When you engage first with the company, how does the conversation start?
Sure. So generally the company has grown past 40 or 50 people. So they remember pretty recently what it was like to be sitting around a table and be able to communicate really clearly about what's happening on the team. But now that company has grown, they probably have a support team that has 20 people in it, or a sales team that has 20 people in it, one or the other at that scale. And those teams are on the front lines. They've got big goals. They've got they got a lot of pressure on them, and they're constantly learning what works and what doesn't as the team goes on. So we'll come into the company and say, you've already learned a ton. It's in your emails, it's in your Slack chats, it's in your PDFs, and it's in your PowerPoints. But right now, people have to go and search a bunch of different places to find out what the company knows works and what the company knows does not work. Let's get that all into Lessonly. It's a searchable repository. It's also assignable. So I can assign you whatever I need you to know to make sure that you've seen it. I can track that you've seen it. I can respond to questions that you have about that information. If you find out that a piece of learning is out of date, you only have to click a button to notify me that it's out of date, and I can come and act on that. So we collaboratively, as the learners and the creators of this content, make sure it stays up to date, make sure that people can benefit from it, and make sure that in your moment of need, you can find the answer to the problem that you have.
Very interesting. What was the genesis of Lessonly?
Sure. Genesis was one of my business partners that helped me start the company. His name is Eric Tobias, co-founder in the business.
Yeah, no, right.
He had started and sold 3 companies. Was just about to sell his 3rd one when we started working on Lessonly. And he had never invested in a learning management system, but he always worried about his people being on the same page. Uh-huh. So his unique insight was, why have I not made that investment when I always worry about people being on the same page, and learning is supposed to put people on the same page? Yeah. Well, he kind of did some soul searching and realized every time he considered it, the learning management systems they looked at were really expensive. They required a lot of effort to get value out of them, and oftentimes the people he talked to that bought learning management systems didn't get the value they hoped for. We now know a lot about why that was. Learning management systems of the past, the traditional learning management systems, they're built to protect the company from the people. They're built for me to send you compliance materials so that you can check a box and say, hey, the company is absolved from any of your future sins. What Eric was looking for was a company like Lessonly that did productivity learning instead of compliance learning. It's how do we make sure people understand the best practices, the trusted techniques, the approaches that we constantly, if we follow them, breed success. But that's not what the traditional LMS was built for. So Lessonly came into the market with a new approach.
How old is Lessonly?
We are 4.5 years old now, and by no means did we come into the market 4.5 years ago with this really clear understanding of our value. It took a long time. I guess I don't want to paint a picture that we had it all figured out from day one. There was a lot to learn.
How many employees do you have right now?
We have 60.
60. So in 4.5 years, you went from couple of employees?
Yeah, 1 to 60. So Eric's job was never to be full-time in the company. He came with, him and Christian Anderson and Mike Fitzgerald, the 3 other co-founders. They came with expertise and capital that I had neither of them. And that was very helpful. They were able to help me see around corners. I don't know how I would have started this business if I just started with my experience level at the time, which was inexperienced completely. Where they had seen this movie a few times and they knew things not to do and things to do to breed success, or to up your likelihood of getting to the next step.
Okay. Now, 4.5 years, that's pretty amazing growth in such a short time. I just saw a few weeks ago that Lessony was ranked number 3rd on one list.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit about this?
You bet. So Entrepreneur gave us a best company cultures in the nation ranking on the small business category, which is 0 to 50 people. When we applied for, or when we threw our hat in the ring, that's how many people we had on the team. And we got a 99.2, where the number one team had a 99.7. So we were pretty darn close. But that was cool. It was just good validation. Effectively what they do is they send an anonymous poll out to all of your employees, and they give their anonymous, open and honest feedback about how they think you're doing as a culture. And it was very validating to have the team give such resounding positive feedback. Okay.
So as we said, employees are the heart of what Lessonly does on both sides, internally and externally. What does employee experience mean to you and to Lessonly?
I think it's all about communication. So when I think about how hard it is to be a great employee at any company, I think about what the company is not communicating that the people need to know. And oftentimes you learn what the company needs, what the people in the team need by asking. But I've met leaders who maybe don't want to be that vulnerable to say that, hey, I actually don't know what to do next.
Yeah.
I don't think that's very common around here. I think a lot of people are very open and honest about the fact that, hey, we're all figuring this out as we go. But it starts out with getting a pulse from the employees about what's working and what isn't. And when they tell you something that's working, what isn't, you act on that and communicate back to them around why you took that approach or how you never thought about their suggestion, and you will consider it. But man, it all starts with communication. You don't really know what's working and what isn't if you don't have clear communication. Yeah. And I think you breed clear communication by being vulnerable and making it very clear that you hired people who you respect. You respect their brain power, you respect their kindness and their integrity, and you didn't hire them because you had all the answers. You hired them because you needed them to help you come up with the answers. So to breed that confidence and kind of send a signal to that person that you have confidence in them and you need their help, that's ideally going to be very empowering to them. And it creates kind of a nice virtuous cycle. Where you get feedback, you act on the feedback. You get more feedback, you act on the feedback. But if people are too scared, if they don't think management's receptive or the leadership team's receptive to that feedback, if they feel they're not valued enough or right on the hierarchical kind of level to give that feedback, man, you're in trouble. People pull it off even without that feedback, but I don't know how.
Right. It's a very good point. I did another episode with Jeb Banner last week.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And he had the same, I know, and he actually talked about you as well. And he had the same point of focus on the leader's vulnerability.
Yep.
That it's critical to creating that sort of culture of truth and of trust between employees and the leader and the CEO.
You bet. It's candor. You're not going to, it's hard enough to tell somebody directly to their face that you think an approach they're taking is less than ideal.
Right.
Because you like that person and you care about them. But the reality is that's exactly why you should tell them that the approach you think they're taking is less than ideal, because you like them and you care about them. But we often kind of worry, is it going to be misconstrued? Is this going to make me look bad? Are they going to maybe interpret it, in a way that I hope they would not? I have to set the example on the team that the people who do have candor are going to be praised and promoted at a rate that the people who do not come out and speak open and honestly are not. It's always about being tactful, but it's about saying how you feel. And we're not going to be able to appease everybody's needs. This is not about coddling people.
Of course.
But it is about speaking up when you see that this company can improve, because we always can improve. If you came into a startup and you thought they were going to have everything nailed, you got another thing coming. You're going to be sorely disappointed because the whole idea of a startup is it's messy.
Yeah, it is messy. So now that you have about 60 employees, do you have some sort of structure around the culture and the employee experience, or is it pretty much everything does everything? Everybody does everything?
Oh, yeah, there's definitely a structure. I think at this point, there was a really critical point around 30, 35 people. It's still critical now, but that's when I started to really feel that there were people on the team in different departments who didn't really understood how they didn't understand or clearly see how they impacted every other department's ability to function. We talk about making, selling, and serving. And in the early stages of a business, pretty much everybody fits really cleanly into one of those buckets. You're making the software, or you're designing the software, you're making it. Yeah. The selling part is your marketing, or you're actually selling the software. Your serving is taking care of the clients who have bought that software. that's not an obvious thing that that you need every one of those pieces to have a well-functioning. If people stop making the software, sales are going to suffer, the support's going to suffer. We're not going to be able to serve people as well. If people stop serving the clients, we're going to have a leaky bucket. We're going to lose all these clients. We're going to sell a lot more. If people stop selling, we stop growing, and that's trouble. There's trouble either way. Right. It takes the whole village. Yeah. So what happened around 35 people was clearly articulating how everybody in each one of those buckets impacts the greater good of the company. Because when they see that their role is not something when they see their role matters, which I know it does. I wouldn't hire somebody for a job that I didn't think was critical to the business. It's not, you don't want to waste money. That would be a waste of money.
It was.
But people, I think, need to be reassured, and I don't blame them. It's my job, and it's the leadership team's job to be clear about how you impact the business, how important you are, and how if you don't show up every day, you're letting everybody else around you down. I'm not saying you're going to nail it every day. Like, who nails it every day? I certainly do not nail it every day. But you better show up with the intention to want to nail it every day.
Right.
And if it doesn't work, go home, run, take a nap, do what you need to do, but come back tomorrow and get it done. We're all human. But man, show up. Like, we're here to work. This is not supposed to be a place where we have not made it. That's why it's a startup. And I think there's a misconception sometimes for people who want to work at a company that it's going to be very easy. And it's like, no, it's going to be really hard, and that's why it's rewarding, because you learn a lot really fast. You get to juggle a lot of balls, and that'll also be the primary source of your frustration. It's really hard. Yeah. That's why that's why we call it hard. It's not easy. But you learn in that challenging moments. You learn a lot about yourself. You learn a lot about how business works. And if you're excited about self-awareness and learning how businesses work, you should come to a startup. But man, like I said, it's messy.
It is. So around 35 employees or so, what specifically did you do to build that structure between the different teams, development, sales, marketing, and then support?
Thank you for bringing me back to that. Sometimes I get on a tangent, so I appreciate it.
No problem.
So I was given feedback that was something that people needed more clarity on. So the first thing we did, because we make an LMS learning software, is we built a lesson.
Right.
And it was called The Roles and Departments at Lessonly. And it talked about what each department is responsible for, all the roles in that department, what they are individually responsible for. If you're just out of college and you just took a sales development role at Lessonly, you probably don't know what a product manager does. Mm-hmm. But that's a really important job in the company. So we spelled it out. We talked about the responsibilities of product manager, passing off to a UX designer, passing off to a front-end developer, passing off to a back-end developer. Just spelling out the fundamentals was the greatest first step. And then we can hold a class, or what we call a mass class. It's still appropriate to get the team in a room to have them ask questions, but not before you transfer the fundamentals in an on-demand way. It wastes a lot of people's time if you sit them in a room and then you talk them through all the roles and responsibilities, because it's going to go in one ear and out the other. But if we tee them up ahead of time with the learning and then we bring them together to ask questions, that can be very, very helpful. So that we started with the lesson, and then we discussed with the team. And as the lesson got rolled out, first I rolled it out to 5% of the team. So some new folks and some veterans, of 2 or 3 years. Yeah. And said, is this hitting the mark? Because, you do it fast, you get your first draft fast, you get it in the hands of people fast, and you get feedback fast, and you start to realize, hey, I missed a part here that was, total blind spot. And they start to give you feedback. And when it gets to the rest of the team, the whole team, you've got a much better, clearer picture of how the roles and departments interoperate. Then the next thing we did was just put together what is an ideal team player? What comprises an ideal team player? Because I talk about being an ideal team player a lot, but if I haven't spelled out what that means, you're going to assume that you're doing it when you might not be, because I haven't really given you the definitions, and I'm making you intuit what it is instead of spelling it out for you. So we took those two things together. Here's what it looks like to be a great teammate at Lessonly. Here's how being a great teammate in your given role impacts the overall ecosystem, and we reinforce that with every celebration. It's not. I'm sure there are still people who are on different levels of kind of understanding, but ideally those levels are not too different. Ideally they're all it's all pretty well understood. But that's not the kind of thing that ever stops. I can't spell that out one time because the company continues to evolve.
Right.
And that's why we make the software that we make, is whenever we make an update to the company, I can push out the change to the team and say, hey, we've added a services division. We used to have a client experience team only, and now we have a client experience team plus services. So if people have money and they want us to help them do something that is going to take copious amounts of hours to get done, we now have a team for it. Well, how do they fit into the mix? You got to it's a new organism every time you add a department like that, even every time you add a new person. And you got to continually communicate how that change affects or does not affect the team.
So obviously, the culture has evolved as the company has grown. Is there anyone in charge of the culture, employee experience at Listenly? Is it HR? Is it you? Is it somebody else?
So I'd argue that it has to be everybody's job. We need to have people who are exemplars of the culture, and those people should be first and foremost the leadership team. We should have people who manage activities and group outings, but that I would argue is one small element of culture. Culture is a shared understanding of how we operate, of how we respect one another, of how we want to win together, of how we work to build momentum together when we feel like we might have taken a ding door momentum. How do we all collectively work to get it back? Culture is the whole entire team. We add one person to the culture that doesn't work out. Ideally, they get rejected by the overall organism. But I guess what I'm getting at is, no, it's nobody's singular job. Somebody asked me the other day, how do you manage morale? And I said, if you really think that you can manage morale, you're in trouble. What you can do is take actions that you hope provoke the positive morale, and you hope minimize any fear that people might have, because there's always fear in the unknown.
Yeah.
But man, managing morale is not something that you flip on with a switch or off with a switch. It is way more complex than that. And I think morale is a big part of culture.
Right. So the critical point in Listenly's history to focus on the culture, at least find a way to articulate the culture and the employee experience. Was it driven by the number of employees, or was it driven by another factor?
Good question. So we really solidified our mission, vision, and values when we started to get to 15 people. Because I was pretty naive. And I kind of thought that was a silly thing to have to do. I always thought that was kind of a big company thing where they've got be nice, be ambitious, like these things on the wall that kind of seemed like Ford or GE could just like switch out their values for the other person's values, and they were not very unique.
Yep.
But I realized how big of a disservice I was doing to the team because we're not all in the same room anymore at that size. People were across. There was a wall in between a couple of different departments. That if we expected people to just intuit what used to be something that being in everybody could be in the same room and actually intuit it, and now that we're growing, we can't make people assume they know the right answer. That's the whole thing that our learning software is built around, is don't make people assume. And I was doing that myself. So I got really good feedback from a gentleman named Scott Dorsey, who started at Exact Target and did a wonderful job running that company. He just continued to reinforce, Max, I think it's important. And I kept saying, yeah, Scott, I get it. And then one day I was like, I think he's right. And man, that was an incredibly important thing, because we were able to come together as a team and throw our different ideas of what makes Listenly special as it was into the ring. And then I got to kind of craft out what I thought the top 7 things were that really drive the positive momentum of our culture. So we have 7 cultural values, we have a mission, we have a vision, and then we have 3 virtues of how you as a person need to behave intrinsically. How every day you need to be hungry, humble, and have people smarts, and be working toward being better at all of those things. But we have these virtues, we have these values, and we have the mission and the vision. And that sounds like a lot, but it's altogether probably less than 200 words. So
you mentioned Scott Dorsey and Exact Target. Exact Target was very well known, at least here in Indianapolis, for its orange culture.
Right.
And it was even, I think, the first time in IPO history that the culture itself was named as a differentiator from other competitors when Exact Target went IPO.
Wow, I did not know that. That's cool.
I believe I read it actually not a long time ago. So what did Scott teach you that he did well, who didn't do so well at Exact Target, and something that you were able to apply here?
Sure. So his biggest gift to me to date, and I'm sure there'll be more, is helping people understand that when challenges are inevitable, that you shouldn't be in this business if you don't expect if you're going to be uncomfortable with challenges coming your way. But you have a choice in how you perceive those challenges. And this might sound silly, but I don't find it to be silly at all. You either look at them as threats or you look at them as opportunities. There's a threat mindset that you can put the lens around that challenge and say, this is going to hurt me. How do I protect myself from this? Then there's the opportunity mindset of how do I look at this challenge and say, how is it going to help me grow? And a real example that we had is we had this really great guy on the team. His name was Ryan, and he wanted to go back to school. And Ryan was so good at his job, so I won't respect for him as an individual, but selfishly I want him on the team.
Sure.
He's a great person. He's good at his job, and he's like, hey, I want to go and do some learning and explore, and I want to live in 4 hours away from a metropolis in California. I was like, well, hey, I respect that. He wanted to stay on the team. I was like, we can't do that right now. We need people who are focused and not going to school for 3 hours a day, and he totally understood. But initially when he says, I gotta peace out, I'm thinking, that's a threat, is we're losing a great guy like Ryan.
Uh-huh.
What I quickly shifted gears to was Scott's mindset of, how do we turn this into an opportunity? And what I realized was, when we get past, when Ryan leaves, and the company continues to be a great company and continues to operate really, really well, I'm going to have learned that we're stronger than any one individual. It's not taking anything away from Ryan, but we have grown to be a much stronger organism than any one person defines. And so the next person, there's always going to be talented people who go into that next thing in their lives. And I need to get used to that. And we all need to get used to that. And we all need to cheer them on whenever they do. That was my opportunity to build that muscle and to learn that we are stronger than any individual, myself included. So if I ever, I get hit by a bus tomorrow, ideally what is left with Lessonly is still able to operate and thrive, because we've instilled the momentum in everybody, not just one person.
That makes sense. I mean, you mentioned that in startup mode, there's a lot of activity going on, right? And a lot of people do many different things at the same time just to have the company grow and keep that pace. Engagement is very critical to the success of any company, but especially for startups.
Yep.
How do you define employee engagements, and do you have ways to measure it?
No, I don't think we're doing an excellent job with any measurements. I don't know how people measure it, and I'm sure we should be learning about that more. What we try to do is anonymous, pulse meetings where people can come and kind of get it out if they got something in their mind and their name is not mentioned. There's somebody on the talent team is taking that meeting and it's anonymous, and they can say that, hey, they'd really like the coffee machine to be a little more centralized, so I don't have to walk forever to get to it. Or they can say something that's maybe a little harder to hear. But we give them the opportunity to do that. I don't think, though, those meetings should be necessary. I think they're important, and there's always going to be people who need those meetings to speak up. I think we should probably be doing pulse surveying. We're looking at Tiny Pulse. We think they're a great company. They do anonymous pulse surveying where every week or every other week or whatever cadence you want to set it at, we can send a question out to the team and get their sentiment analysis. I really would like to build something at this stage in the game where it's a self-policing sort of thing, where candor is a necessity, and if you think there's a problem and you don't speak to that problem, if you think that there's an issue and you don't take responsibility for addressing that issue, don't complain about it. There's no room for you having a negative opinion on it if you're not doing what we've explicitly told you we need you to do to get it done, which is speak up.
Yeah.
And if you're speaking up and you're not getting results, you better come tell me, because that's not okay. But I doubt that happens. If you're speaking up and somebody doesn't give you good feedback on, hey, here's what we're going to do with that. Okay, let me just back up a little bit. Sometimes people kind of just say out loud, and it's human nature. They'll say, hey, I really think we should do X. And then they find themselves absolved from any responsibility for making X happen. They get it out of their head, they tell their superior, and then when that doesn't happen immediately, they're kind of like, oh, they didn't listen. And I just remind the team, you got to take responsibility for the things that you want to see changed. So yes, you get to speak up, but if you don't get feedback, say, hey, I'm going to come back to you in 30 days, I'm going to check in on this. Take ownership of whatever change you want to have happen, because chances are your boss already has a lot of things on their plate.
Yeah.
And just because you said it out loud once doesn't mean that they're going to nail it and knock it out of the park. They need you to be a co-contributor to that goal. And I think that is an easy thing to just pass the duty on to somebody else and then complain when they don't get it done.
Right.
But it's like, that's not going to fly around here.
It's a good point. It's a way to measure engagement, right? You have employees speaking up and throwing out new initiatives or new ideas.
Yep.
But then, as you said, oftentimes it just falls apart because nobody takes action on it.
Right.
So it might be a way to measure that engagement is, for those actually who throw out ideas, how do they follow up on execution?
You bet. I mean, we don't have any formula for it. We're figuring it out. I'm sure that formula changes as you grow. I think that cultural survey was really rewarding, being that people didn't have to say anything. The team could have said, everybody wants their own team to win, but it's also a chance for them to air their grievances and not have any retribution. And people didn't want to do that. They wanted to talk about the things that are going great and the things that they're excited about. And I think it all just really starts with, I got to be vulnerable, the leadership team has to be vulnerable, and we have to make sure that candor is not an option, but the rule, and we'll never get it to 100% candor, and maybe we don't want that. I mean, who knows? But the more we revoke it, the better we do. The more open and honestly we can discuss things, the better we do. And I just respect the people here. I respect their opinions. So come to me with your opinions, and we can talk about it.
So what is it like to work for Lessonly?
I don't know. You should ask somebody else that. I think I have a pretty warped view of working for Lessonly. I feel, my view is just a very privileged one, where I get the best job in the world. Ideally, people love coming here, but I wouldn't want to speak for contributors who, put words in their mouth. I think they spoke for themselves on the survey. That's one data point. It probably changes day to day. Some days you're probably like, ooh, that was really hard. Oh, I don't want to do that again because, something happens on the software side where we have a failure in some place of our application and everybody has to scramble. Those are probably not the days when people go, well, that was the greatest company ever. And then the next day we rally and we do something really great and you're like, that's super fun. I love winning. It's a roller coaster. If you expect us to hit it out of the park every time, you're going to be disappointed. And I like to set that expectation with people when they come in the door is you're probably never going to work harder here than you've ever worked anywhere else. And if you don't want to do that, I don't mind, but just don't sign up.
Yeah.
We're going to hold you accountable to that every day. Don't sign up.
So, in the software world, there's a lot of sort of, agile process when you go through, you develop a version, right? You test it, you iterate it, it's based on feedback, and you continue doing the same process. Now, we talked a bit about how the culture evolved over the 4.5 years of existence. How do you scale up the culture as the company grows?
Gosh, I'm going to find out. I hope I get lucky enough to find out. I mean, I never imagined we would be 60 people. I just didn't have that. I guess I didn't have that kind of vision. That was a dream, and now it's here. And the culture has changed, but it's gonna. I mean, you can't scale, and the culture should change. We should not expect it to stay the same. But I guess at 120, there's probably going to be brand new things that I learned that I haven't even begun to think about yet.
Okay, so that was my question actually. Obviously, you have a plan for the next 3 and 5 years, right? So how many employees you want to go up to, and how many revenues you want to generate, and so forth. Do you have a plan right now on how the culture could evolve as you hire more and more people?
It's a really good question. I wish I did have a plan. I actually don't know if I wish I did have a plan. I just don't.
And you're comfortable with that, right?
If I weren't comfortable with it, I'd be working on it. I'm not saying I'm nailing it. I'm not saying that that's the right call. It's just the only call that's the call that we made today. We find that the business changes so much in 6 months or a year that yes, planning is important, but you better not get too married to that plan because it's probably unlikely to stay the plan.
Right.
And it's hard to imagine what a 120 person company looks like around here. And I think some people will ask me like, hey, where do you see Lessonly in 5 years? If people enjoy working here, like I think they do now in 5 years, and we have made a mark where when people buy learning management systems, they stop thinking about what does the company need, and they start thinking about what do our employees need, and we have helped perpetuate that mentality and made that the rule instead of the exception, that's a pretty good thing. But I don't have any more clarity past that. We think the future of learning is contextual. It comes to you when you need it without you asking.
Right.
How do we get there? Well, there's a lot of different experiments bets we're gonna take, and we're gonna see where they go. But I don't know the perfect answer yet. And if people expect me to, again, they're gonna be sorely disappointed. But I let them know that right when they walk in the door. If they say, what do you think about 5 years? I say, we weren't even in existence 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Looking ahead 5 years from now is just, I don't have the capacity.
Right. So let me ask you this. Learning is at the center of what Lessonly does,
right,
by definition. How do you keep the learning going for your employees? Try to experiment new things, learn new things. How does it work?
Sure. So we just hired a director of talent who has like 15 years of experience in employee development. Because when you join a startup, you kind of have to be a self-starter on your own development.
Yeah.
You don't kind of walk in there and you've got a development plan for everybody. Like there are times, and even recently, where there wasn't a next rung on the ladder, a clear rung on the ladder if somebody really killed it in one of their roles. And that's something you can't sustain for too long. But like it's also the nature of the beast this early is you don't have the resources to do everything you want to do. So we've brought somebody in who can help us do that, and that makes me really happy because we've got a great group of people here, and I want to keep them. I love them. I think they're talented, and I think they're hardworking, and I think we need to invest in them like they invest in us. And you can do that with somebody who has that kind of experience. But it's all something we all need to learn. We all need to build the muscle. Yeah. But somebody came in here with some subject matter expertise, and that always helps. Did I answer your question?
Well, so what do you have a system in place to foster that learning curve within your employees?
Certainly with new employees, getting them through the learning curve has a lot to do with a lot of lessons. I mean, we have lessons that we try to cadence well, where here's the things you need to learn on week 1, and here's the things you might need to be learning on week 2, and that'll only get stronger because we're going to build these things called weight steps into Lessonly, where I can make sure that on the first day you get something, but then 7 days later the next lesson unlocks. Time delayed mechanisms, they're pretty dang cool.
Right.
And that's a really important part of learning, where learning something today and then reinforcing it in 3 days is a way that we really build retention. So anyhow, we're building that into the product. But long story short, we've documented a lot about what we know around here. And we all need to be police of that documentation to say, is this still what we think is the right way? And if it's not, we need to comment on it. We need to act on it. And we need to change it fast. But man, that learning curve is one that I think we do a good job. I think we have a lot of opportunities to do a great job. I think the problem with a lot of companies, though, is they start thinking about how do I do this great when they really just need to start getting the fundamentals down. You're going to be overwhelmed. Justin Fike calls it bird by bird. He talked about a kid who had an assignment where he had to catalog 80 birds. And that felt very overwhelming to the child. So and it was a book with this happening, and the person who was mentoring the child said, "Do it bird by bird, one step at a time." And a lot of times people want to screw off these grand learning programs, when in reality they got to take it lesson by lesson. Just start with one lesson that gives clarity that people didn't have before. Then add the next one, and before you know it, you've really built a nice little library. But man, you're probably not going to nail it straight out of the gate. And it's okay not to nail it straight out of the gate. What you're doing is you're focusing on your employees and making sure they're in the know. Do that one lesson at a time, and you will get there. But man, if you try to make too big of a plan, you might never even get off the starting block. And we see a lot of people who come in, ambition's fine, but we got to make a real plan that's practical. And we are pretty good at practical stuff of like, hey, don't overthink it. We'll help. That's our job. We've done this for hundreds of companies, thousands of teams. We've learned a lot about what works and what doesn't, and we can help people understand where they should start and what goals they should set, depending on how comfortable they are with building a learning program.
Good. So Lessonly is a reference here in Indianapolis when it comes to startups and building culture and
that's cool to hear.
Yeah, how a company grows very quickly and effectively. So what would be your advice for new companies or even existing companies on how to create new experiences for employees?
That's a good question that I don't think I have a good answer to. I think if I was going to give advice to somebody who's starting a business or who's kind of in the early days, it's find people who have done it before and spend a lot of time with them and get them on the team in one way, shape, or form, because people have already felt the bruises that you're going to feel. They felt the pains that you're going to feel. And their story is not your story, but there's analogies to be taken from their stories to yours. Okay. And you can use your intuition to say, when is that analogy appropriate to me and when is it not? But man, if you don't have those people around, it takes a lot longer. I don't think Lessonly is anywhere near this fast of a growing company if we don't have really smart people who have seen the movie over and over and over again and come in and say, in 9 months, Max, you're going to be doing these things that right now are not even in your mind. And then they tell me that 9 months early.
Yeah.
So I can get prepared, and that's a big part of the psyche of like, am I ready for that? And they tell me a year or 9 months in advance. That gives me a lot of it gives me a lot of heads up to hire well for that problem, or figure out how myself I need to grow to be able to engage with that problem. But if you don't have the people who can show you around corners and you're flying blind, I never wish that on anybody. And this is a community that will help you. So, ask for it.
Okay. Well, we're going to conclude very shortly. But typically, I like to ask a couple of personal questions for our guests so
Sure.
that our listeners get to know our speakers a bit more intimately.
Sure.
So you play guitar?
I do.
What kind of music do you play?
I like to call it like a folk rock. It's like folk music with the backbeat. So if you think Paul Simon, I like to say it's about 1% as good as Paul Simon.
1%?
Yeah, 1%. He's pretty dang good.
How did you learn guitar?
I read a book called The Complete Idiot's Guide to Music Theory, and then I played bad songs for about 10 years. And that's when I learned something very important, which is how I don't think I'm ever going to get good at anything if I don't enjoy being bad at it. Like, I was bad at playing guitar and writing songs for so long. I wrote so many bad songs, and I enjoyed it. Every time it was another bad song, I was like, well, that's my bad song. I didn't know how to play it for anybody else, but it was my bad song. And I just enjoyed the creative process of learning how to do it to the point that I did it so much that I got better at it. But if I would have, I compare that to trying to learn how to code. I tried to do that. I tried to learn how to, Ruby on Rails. I did not enjoy failing at that. I did not enjoy getting stuck and trying to hammer through it. My brain, it just made me want to go to sleep. So I never got good at that because I didn't enjoy being bad at it. But with music, I really enjoyed being bad at it, and I loved the progression of not being as bad as I was yesterday. And it was a pretty slow one, but man, it was exhilarating. And I tell people, find something you enjoy being bad at, and eventually you're not going to be bad at it because you're going to keep doing it. But if it's something that you dread doing, well, it sounds pretty natural or it sounds pretty obvious, but if something you dread doing, you're probably not going to be very good at it.
Do you play in a band?
I don't. No, I got a record coming out, but it's not a band. I wouldn't call it a band. I got some friends who were very good at music. I'm just average at music. If you record it, you can record it until you get it right, and then you can sound pretty dang good.
Awesome. When is your record coming up?
So it's in backlog right now. There's not very many places in the country that print 7-inch vinyl records. And we got it on order, but it's in a queue. And they don't give you any assurance that it's going to get out of that queue in any timely fashion. So I'm kind of at the behest of this company, and that's okay. There's not it's not going to make me, it's not going to be a money maker. It's just for fun. So
why vinyl?
Just because people like to play, people want to own vinyl. Even if you don't have a vinyl player, it's art. You can put it on the wall. It becomes an own little artifact. We'll put it on Spotify. We'll put it on iTunes. But nobody wants a CD. Some people want cassettes, but very few do. And I think vinyl just got a nostalgia and a coolness to it. I think it'd be cool to be able to have a vinyl and show it to my kid or my kids and be like, hey, this was some songs that I wrote when I was your age.
Yeah.
I'm pretty pumped about that.
And even did a vinyl in 2017. Is that awesome?
Yeah, everybody else made that happen. I just think it's cool. I like to have something tangible.
Yeah.
And I think people like something tangible, especially when it's delivered in a kind of a neat package.
That's pretty cool. What is the way for our listeners to follow you and listen on social media?
I appreciate you asking. So I am on Twitter at MaxYoder, just all one word, MaxYoder, and Lessonly is also on Twitter at LESSONLY. Also on Instagram, but if you want to find Lessonly on Instagram, you got to go lesson.ly, like a period, because we didn't used to have the .com. So it was lesson.ly instead of lessonly.com. Now we do have the .com, but somebody else has the Instagram handle for less only. So
all right.
Yeah, so what, that's the best I can do.
Okay, well, thanks, Max, for your time today. I appreciate it.
It was fun. Thank you.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to the EX Podcast. If you want to learn more, you can visit our website at exsummits.com to find out when our next events are. You can also find my manifesto on business to employee or B2E branding at b2ebranding.co.